Tantor Audio presents The Age of Dignity, Preparing for the Elder Boom in a Changing America by Ai-Jen Poo with Ariane Conrad. Narrated by Emily Wu Zeller. Introduction. Caring Across Generations. My father's father, Ai-Jen Poo, lived to the age of 93. A lifelong student and then teacher of Tai Chi and a die-hard Wheel of Fortune fan, he had a slow, deep-throated laugh that never failed to infect my sister and me, sending us into spasms of giggles. After moving from Taiwan to the United States to be close to his children and grandchildren, my grandfather often picked us up from school, the silhouette of his baseball cap visible from down the block. He was never late. My grandfather quietly sustained the heartbreaks of my parents' divorce, the passing of most of his friends, and then the loss of his wife of more than 40 years. After my grandmother's stroke, she could no longer care for herself. With tremendous courage and love, for years he cooked every meal, talked to her, and kept her comfortable until the end. One of my greatest regrets in life is that we did not provide him with the same comfort and care in the final moments of his life. After repeated strokes, my grandfather's condition had deteriorated to the point that my dad no longer felt capable of providing the support he needed to stay at home and could not find appropriate home care support. So my grandfather was placed in a nursing home, against his wishes. I visited my grandfather there before he passed away. My grandfather's bed was along a wall in a large, dark room with 6 other people, half of whom were completely silent, while the other half expressed their misery in loud, painful cries. The room lights were kept off, while a sickly fluorescent light in the hallway flickered. The place smelled like mold and death. It was my heart-wrenching introduction to dehumanizing institutional care. When I arrived at his bedside, my grandfather was distressed. He believed the nursing home staff was trying to poison him. He had not slept or eaten for some time. He was frightened and in pain. He was a shadow of the person I knew growing up. I was furious and devastated. After 3 months, he passed away in that facility. I almost feel as though he died the moment he arrived there. His dignity was stripped away upon entry. My father, my sister, and I will always regret that my grandfather's final hours and ultimately his death were so lacking in comfort and beauty. He meant so much to us. I so wish we had been able to keep him at home. I'm far from alone in my aversion to nursing homes. Nearly 90% of Americans feel institutions are not the appropriate place for elders to spend their final moments, months, or years. The great majority of us want to live and age at home. The question is how, exactly, we can manage that. America is about to experience an elder boom, a direct result of the baby boom of 1946 to 1964. We have more senior citizens in America today than we've had at any time in our history. Every 8 seconds an American turns 65. That's more than 10,000 people per day. Almost 4 million per year. A century ago, just about 3% of the population was 65 or older. Today, more than 13% of Americans are over 65, and by 2030, the number will be 20%. The 5 million Americans older than 85, our country's fastest-growing demographic, will number 11.5 million by 2035. Because of advances in healthcare and technology, people are living longer than ever, often into their 90s or breaking 100. Let's remember, people getting older is not a crisis. It's a blessing. We're living longer. The question is how we should live. As a country, we have to figure out how to embrace this demographic shift with grace. Just as the baby boom brought with it incredible power and opportunity, so does the coming elder boom. One thing we know is that the longer people live, the more likely they are to need assistance. 70% of people aged 65 or older need some form of support. By 2050, the total number of individuals needing long-term care and personal assistance is projected to grow from 12 million to 27 million. It is often assumed that women will absorb these tasks, as they have for much of our country's history. But that is not going to happen in 21st century America. Most households today are dual income, which means there is no one at home full-time. At the same time, more and more American households have both children and aging parents who need support and care every day. The need for professional caregivers is skyrocketing. Aging at home necessitates home care workers. Yet the 3 million people currently in the home care workforce cannot meet even the current need, let alone the demand for care that will accompany the elder boom. We will need at least 1.8 million additional home care workers in the next decade. As a result, caregiving, specifically home care, is the fastest growing of all occupations in the nation. By 2018, demand for home care workers will increase by more than 90%. Many of the existing elder care workers are low-income African American and immigrant women who are faced with innumerable challenges, among them low wages, long hours, and inadequate training. Of the 1/4 of today's home care workers who were born outside the United States, about half are undocumented, which means that fear of deportation puts these workers under further stress. These conditions have led to high turnover in the industry, which hurts everyone: elders, their families, and the workers themselves. Many of these issues also have profound implications for people of all ages with disabilities. With the birth of the disability rights movement in the 1960s and 1970s, independent living replaced institutionalization as the clear preference of people with disabilities. Alongside assistive technologies, it is home care workers, predominantly known in the community of people with disabilities as personal attendants, who enable many people with disabilities to manage their personal care, maintain a home, have a job, go to school, and participate in other aspects of independent living. According to the U.S. Census, in 2000, an estimated 13 million Americans with disabilities were living independently in their communities. The concerns and stories of people with disabilities are and should be the subject of many books, and while these topics are deeply connected, this book's focus is the aging of America, the challenge and opportunity of this demographic moment. Many Americans currently struggle to afford the care they need. On average, a home health aide hired through an agency costs approximately $21 per hour. The cost of an assisted living facility averages $3,300 per month, and a semi-private room in a nursing home costs $6,200 per month. Yet the average Social Security check amounts to just $1,230 per month, and Medicare provides little, if any, support for home-based care. How can elders or people with disabilities remain at home and live independently without sufficient support or funding? Our country has not adequately accounted for the caregiving we need. Yet, home care is the future. By 2010, we at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, an organization I helped found in 2007 to support the nearly invisible workforce employed inside homes across America, began hearing more and more workers asking for training in elder care. Although these workers had been hired as nannies and housekeepers, they were now being called upon to provide home care for their employers' aging parents, too. In response, in 2011, together with our sister organization, Jobs with Justice, we launched Caring Across Generations, an initiative that addresses two of the major social issues of our time: widespread unemployment and the coming need for care for the nation's expanding aging population. At the same time that millions of people in the United States are struggling to survive long-term unemployment, there are far too few workers who are positioned and prepared to provide care for the growing number of elders and people with disabilities. The demographic shift creates a moment when we can set in place a system to affirm the dignity of people at every stage of life and in every walk of life, and create millions of good jobs in the process. Caring Across Generations led jointly by 20 organizations representing caregivers, care consumers, and their families, is a national movement to embrace our changing demographics, particularly the aging of America, and an opportunity to strengthen our intergenerational and caregiving relationships. We are calling for an innovative approach to care, rooted in our homes and communities, that brings us all together and offers support to everyone involved. As for me, people always ask how I arrived at the work I do with domestic workers. When they do, I immediately think of my mom. While she was not a domestic worker, I can't conjure a single image of my mother resting during my whole childhood. She learned English, she worked and went to school, and she was the only one in her class at medical school with 2 children. I can remember her dropping me off at daycare, picking me up, making dinner, cleaning the house, ironing clothes. But I can't remember her ever relaxing. I don't think she saw that as an option. It was assumed that even though she had a PhD in chemistry as well as an MD, and went on to become an oncologist at 2 of the top cancer centers in the nation, she would still be primarily responsible for feeding, clothing, and getting me and my sister to daycare and school. Even today, at the age of 64, perhaps out of habit, she doesn't stop. She is always up the earliest, and while she goes to bed earlier these days, for the entire day she is going. As a young person, I saw women as key to everything working well. Yet our systems were not working for women. So I joined my first women's organization in high school and have not looked back since. No question, my dedication to women was inspired by my mother and my mother's mother, the brilliant, strong, beautiful women who cared for me. They were innovators and trailblazers, yet so much of their work seemed to go unnoticed and unappreciated. They sacrificed so much, even their own health at times, to work and to care for us, the way so many women and family caregivers do. Today I witness the domestic workers in my organization caring for the families they work for and, after a long day, returning home to care for their own families, surviving with less support and fewer resources than my mother had. Working women of all walks of life face impossible choices. I hear and collect their stories everywhere I go. You will find many in this book. They help expand my sense of what's possible, and they have helped me through my own difficult choices. Well, you should have stopped traveling. That's the first thing a friend of mine said to me after my miscarriage. Like millions of other women in America and around the world, I've been through the quiet, enigmatic labyrinth of fertility treatments and all the heartache associated with the process. I know the impossible choices women face while deciding which work trips to cancel in preparation for fertility treatments, the desperate searches for medical laboratories while traveling, the sleepless nights filled with guilt, self-doubt, and shame that come along with making a choice, whatever it is. And I know what it means to need to focus on one area of care and not have a whole lot left for anything or anyone else. At every stage of my struggle with fertility, my mom always told me, "We'll be okay." What if she wasn't okay? What if she needed me? What if I had to travel for her? I never stopped feeling the need to prepare for that moment and what it would mean for my ability to care across generations, in both directions. Almost all our major laws and systems for care are based on standards and demographics from another era. However, today, from what I see all over the country and in many places across the globe, we're finally moving from impossible false choices to real choices. People are already adapting. In their experiences and stories, many of which I've tried to include in this book, we can see the future we need to create. We can see the way we need to adapt the system. With some course corrections in our culture and in our institutions, we can have the care infrastructure that will enable us to live our full potential. We've adapted many systems before, changing our country for the next era. And while it's never going to be easy to be the mom, partner, or daughter that you want to be, at least the very material and practical elements of that complexity can be relieved by a solid, reliable care infrastructure. This is a book of problems finding solutions. When they do, it will give us all real choices, no matter who we are or what role we play at any given time. Choices that enable us to be free, to love, to have peace of mind. The moral of this story is that a caring America is entirely within reach. Care is something we do. It's something we want. It's something we can improve. But more than anything, it's the solution to the personal and economic challenges we face in this country. It doesn't just heal or comfort people individually. It really is going to save us all. Part 1. A Changing America Needs Care. The questions of elder care in America loom large. How many of us will need it? Who will do it? Who will pay for it? What type of care do we mean? Someone to clean and cook? To lift spirits or provide emotional support? To help dress or lift an aging body? What qualifies someone to provide care? And where is care best given? At home or in specialized institutions? For how long will care be needed? Can we afford dignified care? What is the cost, moral and economic, of not supporting it? It is time that we really see and listen to elders, especially those over the age of 85, the fastest growing sector of America's population. The family members who care for them, particularly who care for both their children and their elder parents, and the workforce of professional caregivers on whom we rely. The more we consider the meaning and importance of care, the more we realize that all of us, all 314 million Americans, all 7 billion residents of planet Earth, are caught up in this issue. I think of a walk I took the other day with my writing partner, Ai-Jen. During the months we worked together on this book, we took many walks, leaving our laptops behind to talk through ideas as we breathed in fresh air. This particular day was in late winter. The palette of the world was mostly the gray of the cloudy sky, the brown of the ground and the curled leaves, and the black of the tree trunks and the surface of the lake. Ai-Jen's small rescued dog, Maisie, bounded ahead, taking her usual delight even in the bleak surroundings, and when we caught up with her sniffing something in the leaves, I pointed down. "Look! Maisie found the first crocus!" It was delicate, not quite open, and the palest purple. We smiled and resumed our walking and talking, and then Ai-Jen grabbed my arm. "Look, Ai-Jen! They're everywhere!" As if by magic, suddenly we could see the pale purple flowers poking up through the ground everywhere we looked. All it took was opening our eyes to the first one for us to notice that they were everywhere, all around us. That is what the issue of care is like. Once our eyes have been opened, we see it everywhere. Chapter 1. The Elder Boom. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what happens with a love like that. It lights up the whole sky. Hafiz. I'm not afraid of dying, my grandma tells me, but I am afraid of getting dementia or having a stroke. That's really scary. The idea of not being able to find my way home, or not remembering my own children. But when you get older, you never know what will happen. My mother's mother. She has always been my greatest teacher. Every time you laugh, you extend your life an extra day, so you may as well laugh a lot, is one of her standard pieces of wisdom. I learned that from her, and now she's teaching me about what it looks like to age with humor, grace, and dignity. Her experience of old age so far, surrounded by care and support, stands as a beautiful contrast to the heartbreaking example of my paternal grandfather, whose story I shared in the introduction. I was her first grandchild. From ages 1 to 2, I lived under her care in Taiwan, because my mom, at age 25, was still finishing her graduate studies at Carnegie Mellon and working to put herself through school. Even after I came back to the United States to attend preschool, I spent many childhood summers back in Taiwan in my grandmother's care, accompanying her to the market in the morning and watching her prepare food while tracking the flight patterns of outrageously large cockroaches. Munching on the American Pringles I carefully rationed to last my stay, I listened to her stories about all of our relatives. Like the sun in the center of my family's universe, she was, and still is, the one around whom we all revolve. My grandmother was born in 1926 and raised in Anhui Province in China. She lived through World War II and the Civil War that caused her to flee China for Taiwan, where she lived and worked for more than 50 years, raising 3 children, my mom, the eldest, and 2 sons. I never take anything for granted. I lived through the war, World War II, so I know what it means to suffer. When I was a child, I was really unhealthy. I had malaria, typhoid, many dangerous illnesses, and I never died. I can withstand a lot. Back then, we had no choice. I look at the positive of everything. Whatever the situation is, I always try to look on the bright side. She worked as a nurse in a clinic from 1948 until 1983, when she became the clinic administrator. Thanks in large part to her hard work and sacrifice, all 3 of her children completed college and received financial aid to attend graduate programs in the United States. They all settled in the United States, had children, and put down roots in their new home. At first, my grandmother stayed in Taiwan after her retirement, until the pull of more time with her grandchildren became irresistible. In 2000, she and my grandfather sold their small apartment in Taipei and moved to the United States. After living with my mom and then my uncles, they decided to settle in Los Angeles, in a Chinese retirement community on Valley Boulevard in Alhambra, where groceries and prepared food are all within walking distance and most people speak Chinese. Soon after moving there, my grandfather had a stroke that left the right side of his body paralyzed. My grandmother, while still extremely vibrant and healthy, had broken her hip not long before the stroke, so she was not able to lift anything heavy. My grandfather needed help with everything: getting out of bed, getting dressed, bathing, eating. Every daily activity of life required the assistance of a physically strong person. So they asked around, and my grandmother found an ad for a home care agency in the Chinese newspaper. She contacted the agency and hired a home care provider. My grandparents had 2 care providers come through, and for various reasons, each stayed for only a year or so. Mrs. Sun was their 3rd, and she became, as they say, like part of the family. With Mrs. Sun's assistance, for the following 2 years after the stroke, my grandfather was able to live with my grandmother at home, as he had for more than 50 years of marriage. He was able to eat the food my grandmother cooked, in the style of Anhui Province, where they're both from, and though he couldn't talk much because the paralysis from the stroke impacted his speech, he could still sit at the table and be a part of our dinner conversations. He still had questions for us that Mrs. Sun or my grandmother could interpret for us. Thanks to the care team of Mrs. Sun and my grandmother, my grandfather was able to live in the comfort of his own very clean home until his 2nd stroke landed him in the hospital for 2 months. After my grandfather was hospitalized, I flew out from New York to visit him in California. A range of emotions cycled through me as I made my way to the hospital: guilt, regret, fear, longing, and appreciation. I was sorry that I hadn't been to the hospital sooner, that I hadn't visited enough over the past 4 years since his first stroke. My flight across the country was a long, slow stream of memories of my grandfather from my childhood, when I spent my summers living with him and my grandmother in Taiwan. I had a vivid memory of him sweeping the apartment floors in his underwear in the hot summer evenings with a handmade straw broom, asking me whether I had washed my hands. Cleanliness and order were always very important to him, and he insisted that everyone in the family wash their hands repeatedly throughout the day. When I finally arrived at the door of the hospital room, the first person I saw was Mrs. Sun. The hospital was more than an hour's drive from Mrs. Sun's home, yet she came every day, usually twice a day, to see my grandfather. She arrived in the morning and stayed for the greater part of the day to help him with his needs as she always had, with eating and bathing, and to keep him company. Then she would go home for dinner with her own family. Most nights, she would return to the hospital after dinner just to check on him and my grandmother. There in the hospital, Mrs. Sun was combing my grandfather's hair at his bedside, with the same black plastic comb that he had used for years. My grandfather had a beautiful head of hair. He was one of those blessed men who didn't lose his hair as he grew older and whose hair didn't turn gray until much later in life. He took great pride in his hair, and I remember watching him comb it perfectly into place when I was a child. Mrs. Sun knew that combing his hair was just the thing to help him find calm in the midst of the most frightening transition that a person can make, into the unknown. My grandfather wasn't awake when I arrived. I washed my hands before sitting down at his bedside to start my goodbyes. I wish I had been able to stay so I could have been there when he passed away several weeks later, but I took comfort in knowing that my grandmother and Mrs. Sun were with him at the very end. 5 years later, Mrs. Sun still comes to my grandmother's home every week to help her with cleaning and chores, so that she can live independently, in the same apartment she shared with my grandfather. Today, at 87, my grandmother looks more like she's in her late 60s or early 70s. Her black hair is well coiffed, thanks to regular Saturday visits to the salon. She is still walking upright and leads an active life. She has her favorite Chinese soap operas. She plays mahjong with her friends. She's a mahjong shark, and goes to church twice a week. I'm glad to be living on my own, able to take care of myself for the most part. I know I need support for some things. My training as a nurse allows me to understand what's happening with my body and how to take care of my health perhaps more than other people. I have friends who are constantly at the doctor and constantly in need of someone at their side. Most people my age are not as independent. I do need Mrs. Sun. If I need to go to the doctor or get my hair done, she comes with me. Going to church, she or her son takes me. Having spent 4 years of her life worrying about my grandfather, and the rest of her life supporting her children and grandchildren, now that she's in her 80s, my grandma is living life on her terms. Mrs. Sun helps make that possible. I do worry about her, my mom says about my grandma. But I worry about her less since Grandpa passed away. When Grandpa was still around, after he had his stroke, your grandma sacrificed a lot. He couldn't do anything for himself. She essentially took over attending to everything he needed at night after his caregiver left. That took a huge toll on her. She had to get up throughout the night. For 4 years, she could barely get sleep. Now that he's passed, she's on her own and has more flexibility to be active and take care of her own health. My mother is 63 and counting the days to her own retirement. She longs to move to Alhambra and spend every day with my grandmother, who is also her best friend. When they're together, my mother comes alive. She laughs more, because my grandmother demands it. It's like my mom gets an extra battery when my grandmother's around. When they're not together, they talk on the phone just about every day, chatting about the weather, updates from my sister and me, and stories about different people with illnesses. Between my mom's work as an oncologist and my grandmother's life in the retirement community, they have a lot of stories about sickness, caregiving, and dying.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?